Another wild weekend in college football. Florida's got a QB again. Oklahoma embarrasses Alabama, and Auburn takes out A&M in a 4-overtime thriller.
And don't forget about Kansas knocking Colorado out of the Big 12 race, and Ohio State finally puts an end to Indiana's Cinderella undefeated run. But is Indiana still in the playoffs?
Oh, and Dog Nation, pack your bags for Atlanta. We're heading back to the SEC Championship. This is the Nitro College Football Show. All right, and welcome to the Nitro College Football Show. I'm Burl.
And I'm Streit.
And tonight, we look back at Week 13 of college football. The latest rankings are out, and we'll preview next week's big games for Rivalry Week. But before we jump in, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you're the first to know when a new episode drops.
And while you're here, give the video a like and let us know your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear from you, all your thoughts and takes on this week's biggest games.
All right, let's do this. Florida does the unthinkable and takes out Ole Miss, just like we called it, just like we drew it up last week. Saw this coming. We said it was classic trap game, and it was.
Yeah, I think everything we talked about last week, we saw play out on Saturday in Gainesville. Ole Miss coming in off the big win versus Georgia, kind of feeling high and mighty. Florida team coming in for a little bit of confidence off the win versus LSU. Lagway getting comfortable in there. And that's what we saw play out. Florida didn't necessarily play great. Lagway was efficient. You know, he completed 10 of 17 passes for about 200 yards. And Ole Miss was able to move the ball, but it was bad decision after bad decision that cost them in this game.
Yeah, and Jackson Dart did his best Carson Beck impersonation, throwing picks left and right. So a pretty bad day for him. And
you know, it's weird, though. I went back and watched the highlights, and Jackson Dart looked really good early in the game. Like, he looked very, very sharp. He was throwing the ball well, but it was dumb decisions by Lane Kiffin. They had multiple times where they got down the field and they went for it on fourth down and failed to get it. Twice they tried to run J.J. Pegues near the goal line and got stopped on fourth down. And then, you know, towards the end of the game, that's when it all unraveled for Jackson Dart. He threw 2 picks within the last minutes of the game or whatever it was that just really cost them. It was kind of a crazy sequence because, like I said, they were moving the ball. In Florida, while they played well in this game, they weren't playing great. They weren't beating them down by no means, but it was a close game there until the fourth quarter. It was tied up, I think, and Florida took the lead, and then Ole Miss had a couple of shots, but they just couldn't get it done.
Yeah, it's a wild thing. I mean, the SEC this year is just weird. It's absolutely weird because Ole Miss goes out, curb stomps Georgia, just beat the ever-living crap out of them. Georgia beat Florida pretty handily, even though, Lagway got hurt, and everybody's going to keep bringing that up. Still would have beat them. But and then Florida taking care of business, taking out Ole Miss, and all the other things that happened the rest of this weekend. But that was the first domino to fall, and what a domino it was.
Yeah, I think one of the things we mentioned last week was that this Ole Miss team, it is a team built on, transfer players, and transfer players can come in at any given day when you have that much talent and come in and beat an amazing team. They came in and beat a solid Georgia team and beat them handily, but then they do the same thing that they did when they played Kentucky and they don't show up. And that's the problem that you have when you have these teams built on transfers. You don't have the cohesion that you have when you have a team that is built on homegrown players. So,
right.
Yeah, that team that was built, that Lane Kiffin said was built to beat Georgia. But that's the same team that lost to Kentucky, and it's the same team that lost to Florida.
Yeah, so there was a common theme this weekend to those three big defeats. Ole Miss on the road at Florida, Alabama on the road at Oklahoma, Texas A&M on the road at Auburn. And what does everybody always give Kirby crap about when he has a close game on the road?
They gave him crap because earlier this year in a press conference, Kirby Smart said, it is really hard to play on the road in the SEC. That's what he said. And people gave him crap about it.
Yeah. And if this week doesn't prove it, then you're just a hater, and I feel bad for you.
Right. Kirby, people said that, and they're like, oh, Kirby's making excuses for his team not playing well. No, Kirby Smart's giving you a dose of reality. And if it would have been Nick Saban saying the same thing, they would have said, oh, yeah, Nick Saban's right. But because it was Kirby and it's not Nick Saban, the media was very quick to judge. Kirby's just politicking for his team. He's trying to make excuses. We know Kirby. Kirby doesn't BS. He tells you like it is most of the time.
He does.
And in that case, you're right. It's proven so much this weekend. Obviously we've been talking about Ole Miss losing to Florida. Second game, you talked about Alabama goes Norman, a 5-5 Oklahoma team that has struggled on offense all year, that had a game plan to not really throw the ball at all. And Alabama got their butts whooped by Oklahoma.
Boomer freaking Sooner, man. This game was crazy. I wasn't even planning on even turning this game on at all because I thought, man, Oklahoma stinks this year, and Bama's Bama. They're going to go do what they do, but they didn't do what they do. And they did what everybody else usually does against them. And it was a horrible day for Milroe. I know they had some injuries on defense too, and just overall, just a really, really bad day. Just like you said, Oklahoma, they didn't really throw the ball at all. They just ran it up the middle.
With the quarterback, with Jackson Arnold. I mean...
Yeah, it was funny. Like I saw something, they said, oh, you're going to run it up the middle. But that's what we do at Alabama.
Right. I mean, they really took a play out of the Alabama playbook and just ran it with the quarterback. And this Alabama team, it's so weird to watch this Alabama team and how different it is from even the Alabama team of last year, Nick Saban's last year versus this year's team, and how reliant they became on Jalen Milroe and Ryan Williams. Like, watching this game, the only offensive game plan they had was Jalen Milroe trying to run and throwing it deep to Ryan Williams.
Yeah.
That was it. That was the only game plan they had. And that was the same game plan that they had when they played Tennessee. And what happened when they played Tennessee? They lost that game too.
Yeah. And, hindsight's 20/20. Now that I think about it, Oklahoma has a really good defense.
They do, because Brent Venables is a really, really good defensive coach. He was the reason that those Clemson teams were that good on defense.
Absolutely, absolutely.
He has helped change the identity of Oklahoma from this crazy offensive thing that it was under Lincoln Riley to a strong defensive team with still trying to find its legs offensively.
Yeah, so the fact that they have this really good defense, and you think about the offense that they run and what they did in the game this weekend. It was Jackson Arnold up the middle, Jackson Arnold up the middle, Jackson Arnold up the middle. Well, if you think about it, if that's what the Oklahoma defense has been facing all year, then they actually matched up pretty damn well with Alabama.
Right. They've seen a lot in practice.
Yeah. And they're like, oh, we don't really have to, it's not that far of a stretch for them.
Yeah. Now the score was 24-3. Obviously, this game was a story about the Oklahoma defense and Milroe's bad play. But I mean, the two interceptions that led to two of Oklahoma's touchdowns,
they were
horrible. They were so horrible. Milroe made horrible throws. And remembering how good he played when they played Georgia, I I was just at a loss. Like that second pick he threw, and he had a chance to tackle the guy, and he tried to trip him. Like what planet is that? Like Nick Saban would have had an aneurysm if that was his player trying to trip a guy when you could have just shoved him out of bounds.
Yeah,
Like I know
but
you're frustrated because you threw a pick, but I
there's
don't
also
understand it.
this guy on Georgia. I don't know if you know about him. His name's Brett Thorson. He's really good at tackling.
Yep.
Milrow could take some lessons from him.
Right. Right. But this game as a whole, obviously, there was some controversy. Uh, you know, there was the play that they ended up calling illegal touching on a 4th down, where Ryan Williams made this ridiculous catch in the end zone, and it was a ridiculous catch, and it should have been a touchdown. Yes, the call was wrong. And Alabama fans are like, oh, see, you know what? You're finally getting what everyone else has gotten for the last 15 years. Calls
Exactly.
that are controversial that go against you. For so many years, people have been so afraid of Alabama and Nick Saban and their pull because the SEC office is in Birmingham and it's close to Alabama. And you don't piss off the people that live near you. You just don't. Whether people want to believe it or not, it's a truth. So you finally get some plays called against you, and you're up in arms in a game where you were getting dominated. It doesn't matter if that would have been a touchdown or not. Oklahoma still wins the game. So welcome to the new order of the SEC, where everybody gets bad calls, where everybody gets bad calls because our officials suck. And you're not going to get away with the ones you used to get away with. You're going to get the crap that everybody else has gotten for years.
Why does the SEC have the worst officials?
Because they have maintained this idea that officials are not full-time employees, that they don't pay, that they're part-time employees. And I've never understood it. You have the richest, most prestigious conference in college football, and you won't make your referees full-time employees.
Do other conferences do it?
I don't know. But in the NFL, they are.
Right. I know that.
And here's the other kicker.
Like give me an ACC crew any day of the week.
Right.
I'll take that. Yeah, just terrible officiating across the board in the SEC. It's not going away anytime soon. It is what it is, and you just got to live with it. And A&M has to live with this giant L that they took down at Jordan-Hare Stadium on the road at Auburn. Another game that I just had no intention of watching at all. Because Auburn's been terrible this week.
And another game that was almost ruined by horrible officiating.
Tell us about that a little bit.
Yeah, so, well, I'll get to it in a minute because it's in the overtime period. So, Auburn started out the game real strong. They jumped out to a 21-0 lead. Peyton Thorne was on. Jarquez Hunter was on. Their receivers were dominating, and they jumped out to a 21-0 lead at home. Texas A&M, fought back. They were able to tie it up, before the end of the game. And then we got to overtime. And after the teams exchanged touchdowns in the first overtime, in the second overtime, Auburn had the ball. They threw a pass that would have been a first down at the 2, and they got called for offensive pass interference. And let me say, Hugh Freeze was angry, and he had every right to be. They had a guy crossing across the field, and he kind of moved out of the way of the referee, but he was just running his route. He didn't bump the guy, and they called a pass interference on him, and it ended up setting them back. So they ended up making a field goal. Now, there was kind of a makeup call once A&M had the ball. I think they called a holding penalty. So A&M ended up kicking a field goal as well. But another horrible call that almost turned the game because Auburn, like I said, they would have had a first down at the 2-yard line going in. Instead, it was a 15-yard penalty. So it backed them up to like 40. And their field goal kicker had not been doing very well. I think they'd replaced their field goal kicker. Actually, it was a new kid that they only had him for a couple of weeks, and he was not kicking great. So he came in and they ended up getting some yards, and he ended up making a field goal, and then they continued on to the 2-point conversion. portion of the overtime, which Auburn ultimately won. They got a 2, and then A&M went for kind of a reverse play where they handed it back to the quarterback, and the quarterback hit a wide open guy and he dropped it. And so Auburn got the win. Strange things happen at Jordan Hare, man. That's what
Place is haunted.
Nick Saban said it on game day. He's like, weird things happen in that stadium, and they absolutely do.
Playing on the road in the SEC is not easy.
No, it's not. It's a really, really hard thing to do.
Maybe people will start actually believing Curry. I doubt it. But
yeah.
So we have these 3 crazy losses. And as it turns out, it was exactly the teams that needed to lose for Georgia to get into the SEC championship. So craziness. 2 weeks ago, we're first out of the playoff and everybody's freaking out. Now we're in the SEC championship game. You can't write this any better.
Right. And so Georgia is going to Atlanta for the SEC championship game for the 7th time in 8 years. Now, for those of us who have been Georgia fans for a long time, to wrap your brain around that 7 times in 8 years is quite an accomplishment.
Is that bad? High score? Is that bad?
It's just weird because making the SEC championship used to be such a big deal. And it still should feel like a big deal, but because they've spent this whole season so worried about the college football playoff and all this chatter, Lane Kiffin saying, oh, some coaches don't even want to play in the SEC championship. Well, guess what, Lane? You're not. You messed around and you found out. But for Georgia at the end of the day, people were talking about, oh, we don't want to go to the SEC championship. Forget that. You absolutely want to go to the SEC championship. You want to get that bye. You want to be a top seed. There's nothing better than that. Yeah, it would be great to not play in the SEC championship and you have your bye game during the championship week and you get to host a playoff game. But you know what Georgia's looking at now? They're going to play the winner of Texas A&M in Atlanta. So they're either going to play a team that comes in with 3 losses, a couple of bad losses, or they're going to play a Texas team that they already beat the crap out of. And you're going to play for a shot that even though you have 2 losses on your resume, you're going to potentially playing for a shot to be the number 2 seed in the playoff and get a bye. And let me tell you that if you're looking ahead to what these playoffs are going to hold, the number 2 seed is the best spot to be. The number 2 or 3. The number 1 seed is going to have a tougher draw in the playoffs because of how it's laid out than the 2 or the 3. The 2 and the 3 would ultimately, if they win their games, would play, for a shot in the championship game. That 1 seed that will most likely be the winner of the Oregon-Ohio State game would most likely get to the championship game. They're going to have to play the 5 seed, who most likely will be the loser of that Oregon-Ohio State game. So those 2 teams that have already played twice are potentially going to have to play a 3rd time. If you are the 2 or the 3 seed, and the 3 seed holds serve, and the 3 seed is Miami, or it's the Big 12 champion, you're playing for a shot in the national championship game by beating Miami or a Big 12 champion or one of these lesser schools from the SEC versus having to play Ohio State or Oregon.
Yeah, I think it's good that we're in the SEC championship. I do see this as kind of like this is our first round playoff game,
right?
Because I'm not sold on Georgia getting into the playoff if we lose this game. This is the exact scenario that Lane Kiffin was talking about. You're gonna risk getting another loss and getting knocked out of the playoff instead of at least getting into the first round.
So, provided that it's Texas, that if it's Texas in the SEC championship game against Georgia, if Georgia loses to Texas, they're 100% in the playoffs still because you beat that Texas team and you beat them on the road. If it's Texas A&M, they're a little bit weaker, so that makes you look a little bit weaker. But you got to remember that with these teams that lost, A&M's already got 3 losses. Alabama's got 3 losses, 2 of them bad losses. Georgia's only losses are to highly ranked teams. Ole Miss has got bad losses. They've got a loss to a 5-5 Florida team now. They've got a loss to a 3-8 Kentucky team. Ole Miss has got way worse losses than Georgia. Alabama's got way worse losses than Georgia. I don't think that they will punish a team in a conference championship game with a schedule as strong as Georgia. Anybody else, probably anybody else in the country.
I gotta stop you there. I do think they would punish Georgia because they have not shown in any of the rankings this year that they care about strength of schedule.
But who are they going to bump Georgia for? Who are they going to bump Georgia for?
I don't know. Penn State.
Penn State's already in it. They already count Penn State in. They're going to end up with one loss. They're already in. You're not bumping Penn State. Penn State's already in. Already count Indiana in. Look, if you think about it as what we saw this last weekend, the Big Ten is probably getting 4 teams in the playoffs.
I'll tell you, it would be South Carolina.
And South Carolina is the only questionable one. That is the only person that you could consider putting in over Georgia. That's the only one. Because Tennessee's in now. Unless they lose to Vanderbilt, Tennessee's in. Now Georgia has a win over Tennessee. So Tennessee's in at this point. To me, Ole Miss's losses are too bad. The win over Georgia is not going to outweigh them still having 3 losses in the regular season. Because at the end of the day, when they compare Georgia and Alabama and Ole Miss, Georgia lost twice in the regular season, and those teams lost 3 times. And if they set a precedent and they put one of those teams in over Georgia, they're looking really bad. All the things that they said about this playoff is wrong if they do that, and I don't think they will. So
we'll see.
South Carolina could be the only case because they're playing well. But you got to remember, South Carolina's got to play Clemson this week, so we'll see what happens.
It's true. Is that at home or on the road?
It's at Clemson, I think.
Okay, we'll see if it's as hard to win on the road in the ACC.
Right.
All right. So Georgia played UMass this week, so it was one of our preseason games at the end of the season, which is always fun. And Georgia getting picked on a little bit here because they let UMass hang around for a while. The defense came out just lifeless, sleepwalking. Like literally the old saying, you just roll your helmet out there and you're going to win the game. That's exactly how they looked on defense.
Yeah.
And it was a little worrisome. I'm not going to lie.
It was the only reason it wasn't worrisome is because the offense was absolutely lights out. Like this might have been the best offense looked all season. And I know it's UMass, but outside of 3 straight weird passes on a drive where we were moving the ball, like Carson Beck threw 3 straight incompletions, and I don't know why all of a sudden he lost it for 3 plays in a row. But other than that, he was super crisp. We were running the ball. Georgia racked up over 300 yards passing and over 200 yards rushing, I think, for the first time all season. Nathan Frazier ended up with 130 yards and 3 touchdowns. Offense was efficient. I think Georgia punted once. No turnovers. They looked really good. The defense looked bad, but Kirby even had said that the defense, they just weren't ready to play today. It was one of those days. And when Georgia started swapping out some of their defenders, when they kind of got the lead, they put in the backups, and the backups looked great. They got in there and they kind of shut UMass down finally. So there were a couple of long plays, broken plays that kind of also skewed the numbers there. UMass hit that one crazy 75-yard pass play where I don't know what the hell our guys were doing. I think Daniel Harris thought Dan Jackson coming over the top was going to make the tackle. So Daniel Harris went for the ball, but Dan Jackson, who was covering safety, also went for the ball, and then neither went for the tackle. They just weren't locked in.
Yeah.
But like I said, at the end of the day, the game didn't mean much.
Yeah. I mean, the game was never in doubt.
Right.
Georgia was going to win.
Right.
Just by sheer talent alone.
Right.
It was a great day for the offense. I think it was a good confidence builder. It's kind of like, you practice something to get that muscle memory. You get some good reps in, and it looked like they were starting to hit that because, yep, we got our first 100-yard rusher of the year. Good Lord, this late in the season. Just shows how bad our offensive line has been at run blocking.
Yep.
But they were humming right along. Carson, very efficient, showing, a lot of good potential. If 2 weeks in a row, he's had two really clean games, 2 weeks in a row, where he's lit it up. And if the offense plays the way that they've played against Tennessee and UMass the rest of the season, look out.
Yep.
Georgia, it would be the most dangerous team in the playoff.
Right. All right, so we'll move on from Georgia. We'll move on to Ohio State taking on Indiana. Indiana, one of the the stories of the season in college football, undefeated, playing great, but at the end of the day, one of the weakest schedules in the entire country. Coming into this game, where obviously they were playing Ohio State, number 2 in the country, and obviously one of the top teams in the Big Ten. There are 18 teams in the Big Ten this year. Before this game, they'd played the other bottom 7 teams in the Big Ten. Like, how does that even happen? Like, nobody from the top half at all.
Well, one thing that was kind of weird that I saw is last week they have the 100 and something easiest schedule. They play Ohio State. Now they got the 58th toughest schedule. How does that even work?
Because you add in a team that's now 10-1. It's 10 wins and it skews the schedule.
Yeah. However they're calculating this stuff, I don't know.
Some of the other teams that they played also won last week, so you're adding in 10-1 to your schedule. Yeah. But I think Michigan won to get bowl eligible. Some of the other teams that they played won this week, so overall that increased it. That's why. But still, that said, even at 58, you can't overlook the fact that most of their schedule was the bottom half of the Big Ten. They finally played a team with a backbone, and like a lot of people expected, they were able to hang with Ohio State there, early in the game. But in the second half, started making the little mental mistakes and errors that happen to a team when they're overwhelmed by, the talent on the other side of the ball. Ohio State pulled away.
Yeah, that's the difference between the elite teams and the good teams, right? It's that depth. And Ohio State, we know that roster's stacked from top to bottom. And Indiana's a good team. Don't get me wrong, I am not hating on Indiana at all. But they just aren't in that same class where consistently they could keep up with an Ohio State, because they're gonna run down and Ohio State's gonna lean on them, and that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, they made the mistakes that you can't make as a team like Indiana playing a team like Ohio State. They fumbled the snap on the punt, and then they gave up a punt return touchdown. Like, you have to be solid in the special teams when you are playing a team that is better than you. You can't. Those are areas that you should be able to at least stay equal with them if you just do your job.
Yeah.
And in both those cases, they didn't. Caleb Downs is one of the best players in America. There's a reason that we wanted him at Georgia, and why Ohio State swooped in, even though he'd already got an apartment in Athens and was about to enroll, and paid him a ton of money to come up there. He's one of the best players in the country, and he showed it. That punt return was fantastic.
Yeah. And credit to Ohio State. They came out, took care of business, and they look like the number 2 team in the country. I mean, right. I don't think anybody can dispute that Ohio State is clearly deserving of that number 2 spot.
Right. Oh, they clearly are. This game, it was 38-15, 23-point game. Really probably wasn't that close because, Ohio State kind of made some mental mistakes there early in the game that kept them from scoring. I think they went for it on a 4th down once, and it really wasn't that close. Some people are pointing to Ohio State being sore losers because they scored a touchdown in the last minute of the game to make it 38-15 when it was 31-15. But in this day and age of playoff seedings and everything else,
you got to do it.
Go in and score and make it look better. You have to when you're playing another team in the top 10. It looks better to beat another top 10 team 38-15 than it does 31-15. It just does.
Absolutely.
Optics are all about the game, and you need everything you can get. So anybody mad? I'm not a Ryan Day fan, but score the touchdown.
Yeah. Perception is reality, especially when there's a selection committee who is ranking and seeding teams in a way that no one can figure out
how they're doing it. Yep.
Yeah. Ohio State, they are going to be a really dangerous team in the playoff. We'll see how far they've come when they play in the Big Ten championship against Oregon for that rematch. It'll be interesting. Neutral site. See who comes out on top there. I got to think
right now,
I got to think that Ohio State's favored.
Oh, they'll be favored. And I honestly think that right now, looking at the landscape of college football right now, I'm a Georgia fan through and through, but I can't say that I think we're one of the top 3 teams in the country right now. I think we're top 5, but I think right now you've got Oregon and Ohio State have separated themselves from everybody else.
Absolutely.
Just like in years past, that's the problem, going to this 12-team playoff is even in the years when we've had a 4-team playoff, up until last year, you've always had definite separation of the teams, right? That even within those top 4, there's been 1 or 2 teams that have just been way better, So even at 4 teams, you had disparity. And so everybody's like, 12 teams, it's going to be, more chances. Do I think that there's anybody down the card right now that can really hang with Oregon, Ohio State, maybe Georgia, maybe Texas? Outside of that, maybe Notre Dame, but they have lost to Northern Illinois. So is there anybody down that card? I don't know. I don't know if I can say that right now.
I mean, SMU is going to take it all. They're going to
win it. You and your boy, Craig James.
Exactly. The fighting Craig Jameses. All right. So switching gears, let's head down to Big 12 country. Kansas is another team that you wouldn't want to see in the playoff right now.
Kansas is the best 5-6 team in the country. I can honestly say they are the best 5-6 team in the country. They have 3 straight wins over, at the time, highly ranked teams because they beat Iowa State, they beat BYU, and now they've beaten Colorado.
And this is a big one for Colorado to lose. I mean,
it basically ends Colorado's hopes in the Big 12. There are way down the line scenarios with when it's 5 or 6 teams tied that they could get back into that Big 12 title game, but they had the inside shot. They were playing well, and all they had to do was win out, and they were going to be in that game. With the glitz and the glamour and that team and everything, they were going to get the spotlight. They screwed around, and Kansas hurt them. They went in there prepping and confident, and Kansas put it on them.
They did. And I'll say this. I am a Coach Prime fan, but I think he's a little overrated this year. And the reason being is he's got 2 players on his team that may go number 1 and 2 in the draft this year.
Yep.
If you had the number 1 and 2 player in the draft on your team, on any other team that was worth a damn, would you be losing to Kansas?
Nope. You wouldn't be letting Devin Neal run for 207 and 4 touchdowns, I'll tell you that much.
I mean, if Travis Hunter and Shadur Sanders were on Ohio State or Georgia or Texas, I mean, no way they wouldn't lose to Kansas.
You also wouldn't have guys on your team doing the Heisman pose when they scored a touchdown, but they're still down multiple scores.
Yeah, that's a bad look.
I like Travis Hunter. I think he's a fantastic player, but you're making good plays, son, but you're losing the game. Like, keep your focus where the focus needs to be. I even saw after the game, Dion talking to his players, and I'm normally not a big Dion fan as a coach. I don't really like him. I don't like his approach, but he was pretty good. It was pretty good down home. Was like, look, you guys went out there and you got humbled. You got beat. We went in there confident, and this team outplayed us, and that's what happens. And it was a very, very, for Dion, a very humble approach that I haven't seen much out of him, because usually it's, it's the flash and kind of making excuses, and he wasn't. He was pretty straightforward with his team. So it cost him. They absolutely had a chance. If this is the ascendancy of Colorado into being a football power that the media would love to have happen, it hit a serious road bump in the form of the Kansas Jayhawks.
It did, but they still got Juju, right?
Yep, Juju Lewis committed there. We'll see how long that holds if Dion ultimately goes to the NFL. He's already getting, Dion is getting some rumors for some of these opening jobs that may be coming in the NFL. And, if he takes one of those jobs and commits to drafting his son and around him, I could see it happening, because it's the flash. It's the flashy name.
Yeah, well, depending on where he goes, I mean, getting up there to draft his son might be a little too difficult.
It may be.
Unless Shedeur is like, I am not. He's going to pull a John Elway or Eli Manning.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Or it could be a situation with like LeBron James's kid this year. You're like, no, like, if you draft my son, I'm going to come play with you. I'm going to come play for you. It might
I'll
be
come coach for you.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that could absolutely be the situation. If as part of his deal, I'm coming to coach for you, you're going to trade up, and so I can take my son.
Yep. Deion Sanders.
But outside, now that Colorado's kind of out, it opened the books for Arizona State, who now looks like, in my opinion, is probably the favorite to get the Big 12 playoff bid. They knocked off BYU. They jumped out to a lead, and BYU came back on them. But Arizona State was able to hold on and win that game. They're set to be in the Big 12 title game with a win next week. They play in-state. They play Arizona. And then just based on how things are shaping out in the Big 12, there are lots of potential scenarios. But if everybody holds set, Arizona State beats Arizona. Iowa State plays Kansas State next week. If Iowa State wins, then they'll get in. So it'll be Arizona State, Iowa State in the Big 12 title game. The other scenario is that BYU could get in with a win over Houston and an Iowa State loss to Kansas State. If some more stuff happens down the road, even further, then there's a small chance Colorado gets in. But
what a great story,
likely,
though.
Yeah.
I mean, what a great story. Arizona State was predicted to be last in the Big 12 this year.
Well, I think they were, like 3-9 last year?
Yeah. And now they're favorites to win it. And I think people were giving the coach some crap over the weekend because he was just very straight up about how it all works now. And I loved it, because he said, yeah, all that happened, but you got to rush the field twice. That's awesome. I'm going to be watching Arizona State here in the next couple of weeks because they just look like a fun team.
Yeah, and I mean, if Arizona State wins and they get into the playoff, they'll be one of those teams as a bye. They're going to be coming in. They're going to be a 3 or 4 seed, just depending on what happens with the ACC, who comes out of that. So it'd be interesting, though. They'll get a bye in that first round and then be a second-round playoff team for somebody.
All right, so that wraps up our recap of Week 13. Uh, so also this week, we got the latest CFP rankings and bracket. So it looks like right now we've got Oregon holding tight in that number 1 spot. Also the number 1 seed. Ohio State is at number 2, but they are in that 5th seed, and they would be slated to play against Arizona State as of this week, where Arizona State's coming in at 16. So
Right.
that's quite a gap right
Right.
there. And then Texas at 3. So they're not going to say they're predicting them to win the SEC championship. They're just ranked higher at the
Right.
moment.
They're the top ranked, SEC school. So right now they would be if that held and they won the SEC championship, they would be the 2.
Yep.
Going into the playoff.
They're the 2. Miami is the 3 seed coming in at 6. Notre Dame skipped over them. They are at number 5, and they're holding on to the 7 seed. So they would have to play, or SMU would have to travel up to Notre Dame and play in that first round. That'll be an interesting game if that happens. And you still got Penn State at 6 seed, ranked number 4. They're projected to play against Indiana, who's still in it, and I think they deserve to be.
With all the madness that happened this week, Indiana's been a popular topic. We talked about it earlier, that they have a weak schedule. But because of the madness that happened in the SEC this week, I think they would ultimately stay in. Now, if either Ole Miss or Alabama would have dropped their game this last week, then you could have seen a scenario where maybe Indiana would drop below them. But with those schools losing and picking up a 3rd loss, it'd be hard to put in, somebody with 3 regular season losses versus a Big Ten team with 1 regular season loss. 2, you can make the argument, but 3, it's a little bit tougher of a pill to swallow.
Right. So not a ton of movement. I think the biggest surprise here is Indiana still being in the playoff and Arizona State creeping up into that 12th seed.
Yeah. Because right now, like we mentioned before, they would be Big 12 champion or potentially playing in the Big 12 championship against Iowa State, who's at 18 right now. And then BYU's at 19. So it's going to be those 3 schools. Right now they're at 16, 18, 19. But one of those 3 schools is going to probably end up as the number 4 seed in the playoff.
Right. So looking at the rankings in the bracket as of this week, this is why I think if Georgia loses the SEC championship, they get left out. I just have that feeling that they would do that, because let's say Clemson beats South Carolina this week, and what if Clemson beats Miami in the ACC championship?
Potentially.
So then,
but right now Clemson's not in the SEC championship or in the ACC championship. Right now it's Miami SMU.
Oh, you're right about that. You're right. The Mustangs.
And Miami has a tough game this week. They could travel up to Syracuse. Syracuse is a good football team. So Miami still has to get through this week. If they drop to Syracuse this week, then I think Clemson gets into the ACC title game, as long as SMU wins this week.
So that would be some more craziness in college football. So let's say Syracuse pulls it off, because why not? I mean, they're playing in the Dome, right?
Yeah, I don't think the spread is that big. Syracuse is 8-3.
Yeah, they're a decent football team.
No, they're a good football team, and they're coached by Fran Brown.
Yep, Georgia assistant. So yeah, I think the game is in the Dome at Syracuse, and I think they got a decent chance to win. I mean, they're a good football team. The Vegas does not agree with that. Doesn't look like 10 points at least right now. So, but let's say Syracuse does win, takes out Miami. Clemson gets into the ACC championship game, and they beat SMU. And then let's say Georgia loses the SEC championship like we're talking about. Then I think Georgia would get left out.
For who, though? Because under that scenario, SMU, who Georgia is ranked ahead of right now. So Georgia has 2 losses, but they've got them ranked ahead right now, right? SMU would pick up a second loss. Georgia would pick up a third loss, but SMU would pick up a second loss. So kind of the same scenario right now. So SMU would be out. Miami would have 2 regular season losses to unranked teams, okay? And potentially, if Georgia beats Georgia Tech this week, Georgia's got a transitive win over Miami, over Tech beating Miami, okay? So you're not going to put Miami in with 2 unranked losses over Georgia, who has 3 ranked losses and has a transitive property win over Miami. So Georgia's over Miami and Georgia's over SMU. And in that scenario, the ACC only gets 1 school in.
Right. But let's also say that South Carolina wins against Clemson this weekend.
That's fine. So how I think it shakes out right now, if current things hold, I think the Big Ten gets 4 teams in. Ohio State, Oregon, Indiana, Penn State. That's 4, okay? I think shakes out right now, the SEC gets 3. That's Texas, Georgia, Tennessee, okay? So that's 7. Notre Dame is 8. Big 10 champion, or a Big 12 champion is 9. Group of 5 is 10. ACC. So if you got 2 ACC schools in, that's number 11 and number 12. If you only have 1 ACC school in, that's 11. And then there's 1 more at-large spot open, and that would be a potential 4th SEC school.
I just don't trust this committee.
Yeah, I mean, I don't trust them either. That's just realistically looking at the numbers, even as it's stacked up right now.
It's like the government. I don't trust the government.
I mean, the only way that those scenarios play out with that happening in the ACC only getting 1 school in and Georgia not in the playoff is if they decide to move Alabama ahead of Georgia.
Which I could totally see them doing.
Just don't see it this year. Not this year because Alabama has losses to Oklahoma and Vanderbilt.
Vanderbilt is Texas's best win right now.
They're 6-5.
Still Texas's best win.
I know, but they're 6-5 and they play Tennessee this week. They're gonna be a 500 team.
Wouldn't it be wild if they beat Tennessee?
That would be great because then Tennessee would be out.
Yeah.
Then South Carolina is rooting hard for Vanderbilt this weekend.
Yeah. Maybe. Do we want Tennessee to win?
I don't think we'd face them again in the playoff. I think they'd line at the brackets. We wouldn't face them again.
You think so?
Yeah.
They got us paired right together right now.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think we beat them pretty handily. We match up well with Tennessee, as shown when we played in Athens. So
yeah.
Tennessee doesn't scare me.
And it would be a home game.
I'd be more scared just because of the history of Alabama than Tennessee. I'd be more scared of Ole Miss because they beat our butts in. So
yeah. I would not want to play Ole Miss. I was very happy to see them lose and get knocked out.
So now we're up to week 14. It's the final week of the regular season, and it's rivalry week. That means we're going to have games across the country against traditional rivalries, and you never know what's going to happen in these games. You can have teams favored by tons of points, and their in-state rivalry comes up and bites them in the nuts. So it should be a fun week, but this week also has a lot of bearing both on the conference championship games and the playoffs. So let's start right here in Athens, Friday night. It's Black Friday, and we're having a night game here in Athens. Georgia taking on Georgia Tech. Georgia at 9-2 got a lot to play for. They're going to play in Atlanta the next week in the SEC championship game, but first they got to get past Georgia Tech, a Georgia Tech team that's coming in with some confidence. They're 7-4. Burl, what are your thoughts on the game?
This game scares me a lot as a Georgia fan. I know it shouldn't, but crazier things have happened in rivalry games. It's hate week. It's hate week for a lot of teams. I mean, if you're a Star Wars fan, this is the Sith's dream of the week. And with it also being on a Friday night is very odd. And it doesn't sit well. The last two times the 2 times that Georgia has lost to Georgia Tech in the past 10, 15 years have been at home. And I have a theory on that. So it's Thanksgiving week, right? All the students that are in Athens are at home in Atlanta or wherever. And it's, Athens becomes a little less populated, we'll say that. And you don't always get the full Sanford Stadium crowd for the Tech game because Tech has been down. I mean, let's be real. They've been down. It might be different this year. I don't know. It is a night game. Saw that the Spike Squad and everybody, they're calling for another blackout. So we'll see if the fans can bring the energy on Friday night, then I think Georgia will be just fine. But if it gets into to be one of those weird situations where the crowd's dead and Tech's going to come out fighting at the beginning of the game as hard as they can. I mean, obviously, but this game means more to them than it means to Georgia.
Yeah,
it's like the old Mad Men meme with Don Draper. In the elevator, you got the guy saying, "I hate people like you." Don Draper's like, "Well, I don't think of you at all."
Yeah,
that has been Georgia Tech in a nutshell.
Yeah. So, a couple things about this game. This Tech team is the best Tech team they've had in a few years. Brent Key was the right hire for them. He's a good coach. And they're playing pretty good. Now they are 7-4. They have a major upset where they beat Miami when Miami was undefeated, top 5 team. That being said, they've also skated by a lot of games that they've won that they probably shouldn't have. Listening to some radio today, a couple of their games that they won, including last week's game against NC State and their first game of the season where they beat Florida State. And that looked good at the time, but obviously that's not the case. They had to get some luck and win on a last-second field goal to beat that Florida State team. And even in the Miami game, all those games are games that they won, but on paper and predicted outcomes, they actually lost. So yes, Tech is better. They're better than they've been, no doubt. They've got a good coaching staff. Brent Key is a good motivator. Obviously, we know about Buster Faulkner. But they've been doing some interesting rotation at quarterback. Haynes King's been hurt. He hurt his shoulder, and so they've kind of been rotating a lot. Haynes King's been coming in the game and running the ball, and then they've been putting in this freshman named Aaron Philo, who's been playing well to pass the ball. But it's an interesting rotation.
I hear it's a good streaming service.
Yeah. Well, Aaron Philo is from Athens. He played at Prince Avenue Christian. He was the quarterback there after Brock Vandegrift and actually won 2 state championships. They've still continued to play Haynes King, even though from what I understand, Haynes King can't really throw the ball down the field right now because he hurt his shoulder. So we'll see. I think for Georgia, I think the key is don't do what you did last week against Massachusetts. Tackling, because that's what Tech does. They run the ball.
And stop giving up explosive plays.
Right.
Because that's ultimately what killed Georgia against Alabama.
Right.
Was explosive plays.
Right.
If they tackle, prevent those, it's a much different game.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what they needed to go do against Tech. And
now
we are a 19.5-point favorite. So
right. And if you look at it from the other side, a lot of the focus has been, well, this is Georgia's defense has a little bit of issue. Their quarterback's playing well. Tech's secondary is not good. They don't cover well. They give up a lot of passing yards. So for a Georgia team that over the last couple of weeks has really kind of come into its own on the ability to move the ball from the quarterback position, this is another game that Carson Beck could potentially have a field day. So if Georgia...
And we got some new receivers out there too. I mean, we saw Sokovie White this past week with the starters.
Right, and Nitro Tuggle's getting some more action.
Our boy, Nitro Tuggle.
Right. And the good news for Georgia, I don't know if you've heard the news over the last couple of days, Colby Young's court case is moving forward. I think his hearing is on December 10th, but they have allowed him to start practicing with the team again. Now, he hasn't been reinstated, so he's not going to be playing in this game or in the SEC championship game, but potentially getting him back for the playoff. They also said that Roderick Robinson might finally make his debut potentially this week or the next week.
Now,
Branson Robinson's working back as well.
Roderick Robinson coming back now, that would be huge.
Yeah,
that's
so
both literally and figuratively.
Yeah, so Georgia is potentially looking at getting healthy, if not this week, potentially next week. They also said that Dylan Bell is probably going to be back this week. So you're going to get Dylan Bell back and Anthony Evans. So Georgia's potentially getting those guys back this week and potentially getting Roderick Robinson and Branson Robinson back next week. So 4 guys from your offensive backfield that have been missing for the last few weeks potentially back. And then potentially getting Colby Young back in the playoffs. So Georgia could potentially looking at, by the time they get to the playoffs, as the most healthy and complete team they've had all year.
Yeah, it's almost like having a whole new offensive squad with the amount of players that will be getting back.
That you haven't, a good portion of those guys you have not had almost the entire season. So
I'm really looking forward to Roderick Robinson getting back there. Dude.
It sucked that he got hurt. They said he was tearing it up in spring practice this year.
Yeah.
And
he gives me those Derrick Henry vibes.
Right. He's a bigger guy, he's a bigger stout guy. And yeah, I'm excited for him next year. I think Georgia's backfield next year is going to be really, really good.
Oh, yeah.
Between Frazier coming back for his second year, you get Roderick back, and now potentially Etienne may be coming back because he, missed a good portion of this year. If you got those 3 guys in the backfield, you arguably have the best backfield in the country.
Yeah, hopefully we have a line that can block for it. That's the key. Okay, so we agree Georgia's going to win this game.
Yep. I think Georgia wins. I don't know if they cover because that 19, 20 points is a big spread, but I think they win somewhere in the range of 15 to 17 points.
I don't know if this is factually true, but I feel like it's true that whenever Georgia has a giant spread like this, they usually cover. Again, no facts to support that.
Right.
All right. The next really big game, rivalry game, is the game. I guess that's what they call it. Ohio State versus Michigan. And this is an interesting turn of events, or as Michael Scott would say, how the turntables have turned.
Right. This game is interesting because even though you look at it on paper, Michigan's 6-5, Ohio State's 10-1, and obviously playing good ball. But look a little bit deeper. Michigan, for all their faults at 6-5 this year, they're still technically the defending national champion. Michigan has beaten Ohio State 3 years in a row. Ryan Day can't beat Michigan. So for Ohio State, this game, they have all the pressure on them. Michigan's going into this game with nothing to lose. They know they're not going to defend their title. They know they're not going to be back in the Big Ten championship. But what they do have is that same thing that Georgia had when we had that problem with Florida, is that if you're getting in your head that your rivalry is going to beat you every year, no matter when you have the better team or not, It can create problems.
Yeah, we lived it, and that's why we'll never pull for Florida. Even though we really do appreciate what they did this week, you know.
The funniest thing is obviously we need those weird things to happen in Florida, and then ultimately Auburn. And I said to my neighbor, I never thought I would see Auburn fans rush the field, celebrate sending Georgia to the SEC championship game.
That's good. That's good. You should leave it in.
Yeah.
That's a good one. Okay, so Ohio State is going to Michigan. I don't see any scenario where Michigan wins this unless Ohio State just benches everybody because they don't care.
Or they totally crap the bed. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
doubt they would do that because Ryan Day needs to win this.
Right. He needs this win. He needs this to solidify everything. All the money they spent. We talked a lot about the money that Ole Miss spent. There's only one team who spent money like Ole Miss this year, and that's Ohio State. The difference is Ohio State had the roster already. For Ohio State, this is it. They need to win this game. They do. They're still going to play in the Big Ten championship. Otherwise, actually, they won't. That's wrong. If they lose this game, they won't be in the Big Ten championship game. Because if Indiana beats
Purdue, they would have 2 Big Ten losses.
Because if Indiana beats Indiana, will be in the Big Ten championship. So, they need this. They need to win this game.
Okay, so that's a new carrot for Michigan. They are playing to spoil Ohio State's chances of getting into the Big Ten championship game and ultimately getting that 2 seed.
Right. So that being said, I agree with you. Ohio State's going to win the game.
Yeah, I see that happening too. Next big rivalry game is the Iron Bowl. Now, this one has turned into a very intriguing matchup, especially after Bama loses to Oklahoma last week and Auburn winning last week. Can Auburn ride that momentum and do it 2 weeks in a row?
I mean, this game always has those emotions, right? I mean, last year, Auburn was a miracle 4th and 31 play away from knocking off Bama last year. Auburn has all the motivation in the world to win this game. Like, not only is Alabama coming off this loss and Auburn is riding a big win, but it's just a chance for them to get a win over Alabama in DeBoer's first year, to be rid of Saban. If they come out and win this game this year, it could have serious ramifications for that rivalry going forward. Hugh Freeze, who's a little bit been on the hot seat already in his second year, is putting together a pretty good recruiting class. And if they can get some momentum in state Alabama and pull some guys in, maybe that helps kind of turn the tide a little bit,
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, it is at Alabama, so they don't have to worry about playing at old haunted Jordan-Hare Stadium. So that's going to help Alabama out a lot. I don't see Auburn winning this game, especially with it being in Tuscaloosa and Bama coming off that terrible loss. They're going to be out to prove something. Jalen Milroe will be out to prove something, if nothing else.
Yeah. This one's a tough one. I want to say that, yeah, Alabama's going to come out and beat them, but Auburn just has the momentum, and Alabama just seems so in disarray. And I know they're not really. They still technically have a small shot to make the playoff. They're only 8-3. It's not that bad, but just something in my gut says Auburn's going to come really ready to play in this game. And if last year showed us, or any of these years showed us, that this game always, you could throw the records out a lot of times in these games.
Oh, yes.
I think Alabama wins, but I think it's close.
Yeah, if there was ever a game that you could throw out the records, it's the Iron Bowl. Easily.
Maybe the next game we're going to talk about too. The
Maybe.
next game being the Egg Bowl, Ole Miss and Mississippi State. Not always the best teams, but man, this game's always fun because they just absolutely do not like each other in this game. And no doubt, you've always had great, colorful characters in this game. Mike Leach, Lane Kiffin, the guy pretending to be the dog and peeing, and just all the stuff that happens. It's just one of those fun games. And for Kiffin, this game, they need to win. They need to not lose this game because otherwise, this mercenary team that he built that has failed already a couple times, they're gonna have to go back to the drawing board because playing just to beat Georgia once didn't work for them to be successful overall.
Yeah, this is also one of those weird, day of the week games. They're playing on Friday at 3:30. It's at Ole Miss, so that bodes well for Ole Miss. Obviously, we've seen how well they play at home.
And they don't have to be with all the cowbells.
That's good for everybody.
Right.
Unless you got a fever. But yeah, I think Ole Miss take care of business. I mean, they're a 26-point favorite in this game.
Yeah. Yeah, give me Ole Miss.
Give me Ole Miss. All right, heading over to the Carolinas. You got the old battle of Clemson versus South Carolina. Does this game have a name?
Something with the Palmetto State, I'm sure. But I don't know.
Let's see, just looking it up here. Okay, this might be the lamest name of a game I've ever heard. Palmetto Bowl.
Ooh. Gotta love those South Carolina Palmetto leaves. They be sure to put them on everything.
I mean, if that doesn't get you excited for a football game, then I don't know what you're doing. But this will actually be a game to watch. I know definitely, from the playoff standpoint, this is a must-win for Clemson. South Carolina might be the hottest team in the country, and if they win this game, they have an outside shot to still make the playoff.
They absolutely do, especially if you consider that the ACC is fighting to get 2 teams in, and if they do, then that potentially is one less bid for the SEC. If South Carolina can knock off Clemson here, and if something happens and Miami drops a game or SMU drops a game, you're potentially looking at South Carolina being that 4th team in from the SEC, even if the other games hold serve, because they will have, some really good wins and they've just been playing great ball down the stretch. Still hard to overlook some of their early season mistakes. They had some bad losses early in the year, but South Carolina is playing really well. Lenora Sellers has turned into, I think, one of the best quarterbacks in the SEC just by his play this year. Early in the year, he was originally criticized as just a guy who wanted to run, but he's turned into a very, very, very good passer in addition to his running game. And South Carolina's defense is awesome. They're just playing so cohesive ball. Clemson has continued to play pretty well. Obviously they dropped the game to Georgia, and then they dropped a second game later in the year that they shouldn't have been. But Clemson's still a strong team. So this is probably one of the most competitive games of the weekend. I don't know.
Yeah, I actually think this is the most compelling game of the weekend.
Yeah.
Well, this and the Texas A&M game are up there.
At least in terms of stakes, right?
Yeah. I think give me South Carolina in this game. It's a 2.5 point spread in favor of Clemson, and that's probably just because they're at home. So basically a pick 'em.
Yeah.
With the way South Carolina's playing, with the way that defense is playing, and you never know what you're going to get out of Clemson from 1 week to the next anymore. So give me South Carolina.
I'm going to take Clemson. I think it's going to be a tough game, and like I said, very competitive. South Carolina is playing great. I just think Clemson's a little better.
We shall see.
Yep.
Okay. Washington versus Oregon. this seems like a no-brainer to me. I don't know if Washington's been playing well lately or not. Haven't really kept up with them. So I got to go Oregon. I have no reason to pick against Oregon right now.
Yeah, I think Oregon wins this game. They're the better team. The unique part about it was that Washington beat Oregon twice last year, both in the regular season and in at the time the Pac-12 championship game, and then of course Washington went on to play in the national championship game, and keep Oregon out. And Oregon was kind of viewed as the stronger team last year, with Bo Nix. So once again, it's a rivalry game. There's going to be high stakes, but I think Oregon gets the victory here, moves on. The only way they don't is if they're looking ahead to next week in Ohio State.
Yeah, I agree. Crazy Big Ten matchup there.
Yep, Big Ten.
The Big
You gotta
10.
love Big Ten country.
West Coast football.
The Pacific Northwest.
All right, and going into what's probably the most compelling game of the weekend, Texas versus Texas A&M. Winner gets a shot at the SEC championship. It's at Texas A&M. That crowd is going to be crazy. Night game. First time playing since 2011.
Yep, these were the teams that hated each other so much that Texas A&M left the Big 12 to get away from Texas, and they stopped their rivalry that had been around for like 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
It's very interesting. These schools really do not like each other. They compete for oil money in their state, and I don't remember the last time that a game like this in the SEC, the final game of the season between two teams, the winner goes to the SEC championship and the loser goes home. And for Texas A&M, this is even more interesting because with 3 losses and already, they're essentially out. If they lose this game, they're out of the playoff. But if they win this game and then they go play in the SEC championship game, they could end up being the 2 seed or the 3 seed in the playoffs. So the difference between going to play a game, a no nonsense bowl game or whatever, versus potentially being the 2 seed in the playoffs, it just another one of those crazy things about this first year. In Texas A&M, obviously coming off a quadruple overtime loss to Auburn, it's going to be tough. On the Texas side of the field, so Texas played Kentucky this last weekend, didn't look great. Quinn Ewers went down with an injury. There's some talk that he may be out this week, so we might see Arch Manning in the game. Not too much of a drop-off there. Arch has played well when Ewers has been out this year. But it's always hard, starting on the road in the SEC, as we talked about earlier. So we'll see. Texas, it's been noted that Texas has one of the weaker strength of schedules of the top teams in the SEC. Obviously, their only top team that they've played really is Georgia. They've somehow managed to miss Alabama. They missed LSU. They missed South Carolina. So we'll see what happens. All the motivation there for Texas A&M. Their backs against the wall. For Texas, if they lose this game, they're still in the playoff. It'll just be as a lower seed. I think Texas wins the game. I think they are the better team. That being said, as a Georgia fan, I'm not sure who we want to see. I feel like as a Georgia fan, we'd be pretty confident against both of those teams in Atlanta.
Yeah. With this being on the road, it's only a 5-point spread. It's a night game. The first time playing in years. And these two teams, or these two fan bases, hate each other. So that's going to be a crazy, crazy environment. We know Kyle Field is one of the largest stadiums in all of the world. People forget about that. College football stadiums are actually some of the largest stadiums in the world. Yep. You don't even think about that. And with, yours being kind of being hurt, maybe out. We saw Arch Manning against Georgia, had some flashes of good, but ultimately couldn't do anything. It's going to be tough. It's going to be a great game. But I think Marcel Reed has a Marcel Reed game at home because it is tough to win on the road in the SEC. So give me Texas A&M, and yeah, I guess you're right. I guess Texas would still make them play off because they'd be 2 losses.
At this point they're in. Just like as long as Tennessee holds serves and beats Vanderbilt, they're in. At this point, 2 losses in the SEC gets you in.
Yep. All right. Speaking of Tennessee, Vandy, we haven't talked about them yet. This is a interesting game in itself because there's at Vandy, which we know has become a really tough place to play.
The Nick Saban curse, right?
Yeah. Absolutely it is. So on the road at Vandy, who knows which Tennessee team is going to show up?
I think good Tennessee shows up because they know they're in the playoff if they win. They've been given second life by all the madness that went on, and I think Tennessee will. Vandy was a nice story early in the season, but they haven't been able to get past a couple of these tougher schools here down the stretch. So I think Tennessee wins. I think they handle Vandy relatively easy and get ready for the playoff.
Yeah, I was kind of going back and forth on this one, honestly. I mean, I love Pavia. Great story. Hope he gets his extra year, have 10 years in college football. But, yeah, I agree. Tennessee, their defense is really just good enough to win this game for them.
Right.
Even if Nico comes out there and, craps the bed. Their defense is really good. So give me Tennessee in a comfortable game for them. So that is week 14. Let us know what you think in the comments. Who do you got? Who's your team? Which rivalry game are you most interested in watching? And we'll see you next week.
Go Dogs.
Go Dogs.